Name: Carlos da Silva Souza, better known as Cobra Preta, born in Belém do Pará, raised in the neighborhood of Terra Firme. In 2005, after losing his parents and almost being swallowed by a debt with loan sharks, Carlos fled with his younger sister, Jessica Souza, and came to try his luck in Rio de Janeiro. They ended up in one of the most dangerous places in the city, the Complexo do Alemão. Carlos became a mototaxi driver, one of those who know every alley, every escape route. Discreet, hard-working, always with his helmet closed, never one for small talk. But on July 14, 2009, Jessica was hit during a shootout between traffickers and officers from the 16th Battalion. On her way back from the pharmacy where she worked, a bullet pierced her chest. No one was held accountable. Carlos buried his sister, and with her, he buried his faith in justice. That was the day Cobra Preta was born, the mototaxi driver who would become the vigilante of Rio's hills. It was supposed to be just another hot day on the blazing asphalt of the Alemão. The noise of the motorbike, the smell of burnt oil, the thump of funk music coming from a rooftop above. Carlos had already been there for almost 7 years. He arrived from Belém do Pará with nothing but his face, his courage, and his younger sister holding his hand. He came fleeing drought, unemployment, and a debt that could have turned into tragedy. But in Rio, he found another war. Not one of uniforms, not one of ranks, a war that hid in the smiles of the alleys, in the radios spitting out orders, in the eyes that looked away when things got tight. Carlos was one of those men who blended into the background. He worked mototaxi shifts from Monday to Monday, made deliveries, took kids to school, old ladies to the hospital, and sometimes gave rides to people nobody else would dare to. Cobra Preta, give me a ride up to the Matinha. They had called him that since he was a kid, after he survived a jararaca snake bite in the interior of Pará. People used to say that bad creatures don't die easily, and the nickname stuck. In Rio, the name came back when he would disappear for hours into the alleys and reappear later, as if he had crossed the night unseen, silent, quiet, but always with that look of someone who had seen too much. Carlos didn't use a radio. He didn't need one. He knew the shortcuts not even Google could find. He knew when the guard switched, when the siren was just a warning, and when it meant an ambush. He never wanted anything to do with crime, but he was never the type to bow his head either. This is work, partner. I'll take you, but I don't ask questions and I don't take dirty loads. He earned respect from both sides. But respect in the Alemão is fragile. One slip, one wrong word, and everything can change. His sister Jessica was the opposite. She studied, dreamed of becoming a nurse, smiled easily, worked at a pharmacy on the asphalt, and always said that one day she'd get them both out of there. We weren't born to die pressed up against a wall, Carlinhos. And what were we born for? To live without fear. But fear was the one thing that place had plenty of. Fear of stray bullets, fear of surprise raids, fear of being mistaken for someone else, fear of opening your mouth. That day, the sun beat down with fury. Carlos had just finished 3 rides to Largo do Bulufa and was heading to pick up Jessica from the pharmacy. On the way, he noticed something strange. Radios blaring, people locking their gates, children being pulled by the hand. Plantão. No, an operation was always like that. Nobody warned anyone. The guards vanished, the police came up, and whoever was caught in the middle was left to fate. Carlos sped up, his heart tight, tried calling his sister. Nothing. Sent a voice note. Silence. When he reached the pharmacy's street, he felt the emptiness. The door was smashed, glass shattered, a dark stain on the ground. People watching from a distance, but no one said a word. Jessica had gone out for lunch and never came back. Crossfire, said a man leaning against the wall, not daring to look him in the eye. Who shot? They said it came from up the hill, but no one really knew. Carlos dropped to his knees on the sidewalk. His oil-stained hands trembled now. There was no body there. They had rushed her to the hospital, but he arrived too late. Too late. She didn't survive. The pain was deafening. No scream came out, only a silence that tore him apart inside. The funeral was the next day. Scorching heat, Carlos dressed in black, silent, holding his sister's portrait. He cried. No one saw it, but anyone who looked into his eyes that day saw something disappear within him, a part that would never return. The days after dragged on. He stopped working, locked up his house, wouldn't answer anyone. Some said he had lost his mind. Others said he had left the hill. But a week later, he returned. Same bike, same helmet, same stare. But now with a notebook in his pocket, an old notebook with 5 names written inside. People involved in that operation. People who vanished from their posts at the wrong time. People who went up the hill in uniform and came back down without explanation. Carlos didn't talk to anyone. He only watched, observed, and at night, disappeared. On one of those nights, a name from the list turned up dead near the quarry. 2 silent, precise shots. The favela whispered, "Did you see what happened to Miltinho? Was it a debt being collected?" They say it was Cobra Preta. Carlos said nothing, but his eyes didn't deny it. That was only the beginning. The favela has its own morning rituals. An improvised wake in a neighbor's living room, black coffee brewing in the corner, a neighbor who barely ever spoke showing up with bread. But what never changes is the silence that lingers. That silence when everyone knows who did wrong, but no one says a word. The morning after Jessica's burial, the sun poured onto the rooftop with fury. Carlos climbed slowly, stayed up there for hours. He didn't cry, didn't speak, just stared at the top of the hill where they said the operation had begun. In the favela, everyone knows that justice doesn't climb stairs. It stops at the police base's gate and backs out. Carlos knew that, but even so he went. He put on a clean shirt, mounted his bike, and went down to the precinct on the asphalt. He wanted to know what had happened. Who had been in the operation? Who had pulled the trigger? He was attended by a young officer who didn't even take off his sunglasses. Your name? Carlos da Silva Sousa. Reason for filing a report? My sister died yesterday. She got caught in a shootout. I want to know who was in the operation. Was it in the favela? It was on the pharmacy corner, in the Alamao. Then it was probably a stray bullet. Those areas are complicated. You know how it is. Carlos clenched his teeth. Those areas are complicated, as if it were the geography's fault. I want the names of who was on duty. That's not possible, sir. Operations are joint. It could have been anyone. So, no one is held responsible. Unfortunately, there's no way to pinpoint. It was an accident. Accident. Carlos walked down the precinct stairs as if carrying lead on his back. Right there, he understood. There would be no answers, no justice, only silence. The same silence he saw on the rooftop, in the faces of the neighbors, in the eyes of the pastor at the funeral. But he hadn't been born to accept silence. That same night, he went to the house of an old acquaintance, an ex-contact from when he used to make deliveries for a company that hardly declared anything. I need something from you. What kind of thing? Information. The man hesitated. You're messing where you shouldn't. They already messed with me. Now it's my turn. He left with names, license plates, shifts. It wasn't certain, but it was a start. Carlos went back home, lit a candle, and opened the notebook. Page 1. Sergeant R.M. He had gone up the hill that day, never showed up in the report, was at the corner where the bullet came from, vanished from the base right after. In the days that followed, Carlos returned to work. He circled the hill as usual, but now he watched. In the favela, eyes see before mouths speak, and Carlos saw everything. Who went in? Who left? Who changed clothes? who started walking with an escort. One night he parked his bike in a dark corner, turned off the headlight, and stared at the rooftop above. There he saw the sergeant, no uniform, no rush, laughing with two armed men. "See? It's all a staged play," he muttered. That was when the scream came. Not a scream of pain, but one from deep inside. A scream muffled by years of survival. A scream that said, "Enough." 2 days later, the sergeant's body was found on the train tracks. No signs of struggle, but with a warning slipped in his pocket. For every tear, a name. The police tried to hush it up, said it was an internal dispute. The traffickers swore it wasn't them, and the favela kept silent. But those who knew the past knew better. They knew the nickname. They knew the calm. They knew Cobra Preta had awakened. Carlos didn't boast, didn't smile, didn't sleep. He only crossed off a name and wrote down the next. In the Alamo, when a name shows up on the wall, it's a warning. It might mean debt, betrayal, or a death sentence. But one thing is certain: someone will vanish. That morning, the favela woke to a different kind of murmur. A wall at the top of the community was covered in thick, dripping black paint, hurried handwriting. "You were the first. You won't be the last," signed with a simple drawing, a snake coiled into the shape of an 8, the symbol of infinity, or endless vengeance. Carlos woke before dawn, drank bitter coffee, put on a dark shirt, and slipped the notebook into his pocket again. The list still had 4 names. The city carried on, honking horns, crowded buses, street vendors shouting on the corner. But inside him, everything moved at a slow, almost ritual rhythm. It wasn't rage. It was something else, something colder, as if he were merely an instrument of what had to be done. At the greengrocer's corner, he overheard the whispers. "They're saying it was Cobra Preta." Who? The quiet biker, the one who lost his sister. Are you crazy? He'd never have the guts for that. Maybe he didn't. Now he does. Carlos pretended it wasn't about him, but inside his backpack he carried a crumpled photo, his sister smiling on her 17th birthday. Across town, the second name on the list lived as if nothing had happened. Lieutenant D, retired, now working side gigs as private security at businessmen's parties. Official documents listed him as part of the operation that resulted in Jessica's fatality, but in practice, he had been at a barbecue in Barra. Carlos spent a week watching him. No rush. He listened to conversations, tracked routines, studied the house. One rainy night, he knocked on the mansion gate disguised as a delivery man. The gate opened. The guard got distracted. Carlos slipped in unnoticed. The next morning, the lieutenant was found unconscious, with a note pinned to his chest. "He who kills and forgets dies twice." No camera caught it. No neighbor saw it. Only a motorbike rolling slowly up the wet slope. In the favela, tension grew. The radios buzzed with unrest. Someone's carrying out justice on their own. This is bad for business. Someone's acting without permission, but no one dared speak the name because the Hill already knew. Cobra Preta was a ghost riding a motorbike, and no one knew which side he was on. Traffickers? Not the police? The people? Maybe. But the people also began to fear, because when justice turns personal, anyone can end up in the crosshairs. Carlos, in silence, crossed out another name in the notebook. 2 remained. But one of them was a bigger piece, a well-known name, a man in suit and tie with bought favors, Chief P. He was the one who signed off the operations, the one who gave the order to go up, and later vanished from the reports. Carlos knew that dealing with him was something else. That wouldn't just take courage, it would take strategy and allies. That was when he went back to speaking with an old acquaintance, a journalist who lived outside the favela but knew the backstage of the system well. "You know what you're messing with, right?" "I know. Chief P isn't just police, he's political. He's a whole network." "Then I'll pull on the web." The journalist hesitated but handed over an envelope. Photos, schedules, addresses, everything Carlos needed. That night he climbed up to the rooftop, looked out over the whole hill like someone asking permission from the silence. Then he went down, started his bike, and vanished into the darkness. Hours later, the chief's car was found burned in a vacant lot. No body, no clue, just the symbol painted on the wall beside it, the black snake coiled, waiting for the next victim. In the favela, everything spreads fast, except the truth. Rumors fly from rooftop to rooftop, but what really happened? That stays trapped between those who saw and those who pretend they didn't. After the story of the chief, the Complexo do Alamo hung in suspense. 3 names from Carlos's list had already been crossed out, but no one except him knew that. People only saw the traces, a bike gliding silently, men falling without warning, and always the mark, the black snake. It was no longer just a nickname. It had become an idea, a whisper that said, "Now there's someone who collects." The radios began to buzz differently. "This guy's playing dirty. He's not one of ours. We need to find him. But how do you find someone who leaves no trace?" Carlos no longer slept at home. He had at least 3 hideouts scattered around the hill. He didn't use a phone, changed clothes 3 times a day. He had become smoke, but still, he was only flesh and bone get tired. That night he rode down a narrow alley, stopped at a small bar, ordered a coffee. "You've been scarce, Cobra." The voice came from behind. It was Ronnie, another mototaxi driver, younger, never close, but always respectful. Carlos looked slowly. "Scarce?" "Not really. Just riding where the radio can't reach." Ronnie sat close, spoke softly. "People are saying you're messing with those you shouldn't." "I'm messing with those who killed my sister." "And when you cross off the last name?" "After that, I don't know." The silence between them lasted longer than the hot coffee. Ronnie sighed. "Just don't forget, the hill charges dearly, even from those trying to do the right thing." Carlos stood, left money on the table, and disappeared back into the night. The next name on the list was different. Not a uniform, not a cop, a woman. Dona Azira, owner of a betting house at the favela's entrance. A respected figure, but with old ties to everything that happened beneath the surface. She didn't pull triggers, but she authorized those who did. It was she who had approved the maneuver that day, pulling back the guards for exactly 20 minutes, the window in which Jessica was killed. Carlos knew it. But he also knew Azira wasn't an easy target. The woman was like an old wall, full of cracks, but still standing. Threats wouldn't work. Barging in wouldn't either. He waited, 2 days, 3, a week. Then, on a moonless dawn, he slipped in through the back of her house, where the gate never closed right. He brought no weapon, only the photo of his sister. When Azira saw him, she didn't scream. "I knew you'd show up here." Carlos placed the photo on the table. "She died because of your permission. It was a state operation. You pulled your people back. I got the order. And you obeyed." Azira stared deep into his eyes. "And now? What are you going to do?" Carlos didn't answer. He turned his back and left a note. "I won't kill you. That would be too little. I'll make you live to watch your people fall, until you feel what I felt." The next morning, Azira's closest partner was found unconscious, with the same mark painted on the wall. The black snake. The hill understood the message. Carlos now chose what hurt most. In the weeks that followed, the name Cobra Preta was feared more than any other. Not faction, not command, not uniform, just him. And that began to bother people. On one side, the traffickers wanted to find him. On the other, the police pretended not to know, but used his name to instill fear. If this keeps up, it'll turn into a civil war up there. But Carlos didn't stop. He didn't want fear. He wanted answers. And one name still remained on the list. But this last one, this was the hardest of all, and he knew it. The next bite of the snake might be the last. In the Alamo, everyone knows the rules, even if no one's ever written them down. Don't say what shouldn't be said. Don't walk where you shouldn't walk. And above all, don't mess with those who have a voice on the radio. Carlos had already broken them all. The name Cobra Preta now spread like a curse. People who had never heard his voice swore they'd seen him at the corner. Kids drew snakes in their school notebooks. And the bosses, on both sides, began to feel cornered. Not because he had an army, but because he was just one man. And that's what made it most dangerous. When a single man takes on the system trembles. Because if he doesn't fear death, no one knows where he'll stop. That week, the favela felt strange. The air was drier, the silence heavier. Not even fireworks cracked the sky. Carlos moved like a shadow. He no longer wore the mirrored helmet. His face was exposed, his gaze direct. He knew he was now being hunted, but he also knew fear had switched sides. Until one day, in the alley of Nova Brasilia, a child ran up to him. "Mister, they're asking for you up there." Carlos didn't reply, he just looked. The message was clear. An informal summons, an invitation you don't refuse. He went up at the end of the afternoon. At the top, where only those with clearance could go, sat the man in charge, sitting in a plastic chair, shirt open, radio on his lap. "So, I hear you're the so-called Black Snake." Carlos stood tall. "I'm Carlos. Snake is the name you all spread." The man laughed. "You've got courage? I like that. But your courage is messing with my ground. I didn't mess with your business, nor your command. I only went after the ones who killed my sister." "And you think that doesn't disrupt the rules?" "The favela is in panic, people disappearing, rumors everywhere." Carlos stared back, firm. "Who ordered my sister killed disrupted things first. I'm just setting them straight." The man stayed silent, cleared his throat, glanced at the two armed guards by his side. "There's a limit, partner. Even for justice. From now on, you'll have to ask for permission." Carlos didn't answer. He took the notebook from his pocket, showed the page with 5 names, 4 already crossed out, only 1 left. "After that, you'll never hear from me again." "Who's the last one?" Carlos closed the notebook. "Someone who still thinks he's safe." He descended the hill slowly, but with weight in his chest, because he knew the last name was someone who lived above the hill. The following week, he tried to live as before. Did 2 motorcycle rides, delivered medicine to an old lady, picked up a lunchbox for a neighbor. But people's eyes had changed. It wasn't respect anymore. It was fear. Children no longer came close, old folks lowered their gaze, and even the other mototaxi riders switched streets when he passed. Carlos began to understand what he had become. He was no longer just a brother seeking justice. Now he was a symbol, and symbols frighten. One night, he parked his bike at a lookout, gazed at the city lights below, and for the first time, he doubted. Was it worth it? But the doubt lasted little, because when he went down the staircase back home, he found a note stuck to his door. "We know where you live. Stop, or the ones left will pay." Carlos crumpled the paper, went inside, turned on the light, and wrote the final name in the notebook. The last name, the one who commanded both sides. He didn't yet know the face, but he knew where to start looking. In the system. And the system was already trembling. Each name Carlos crossed out hurt differently. It wasn't relief. It was a new cut in his chest. The list looked small on paper, 5 names, but behind each was a web of deals, lies, and omissions. And now only one remained. A name not in the reports, not in the cameras, not climbing the hill, but commanding those who did. The true mastermind behind the operation that killed Jessica. Carlos didn't have this name yet, but he knew where to search. He went back to the journalist who had helped him before. "I need the top." "You've already gone too far, Carlos." "Then now I'll go to the end." The journalist hesitated, knowing the risk, but also knowing that at this point, Carlos wouldn't stop. He handed over a new envelope, this time with internal documents, spreadsheets, operation orders, signatures. One name kept repeating, S. Tavares, State Secretary of Security, a soft-spoken man, well-cut suit, always smiling on TV. Carlos looked at the signature and felt his stomach twist. This wasn't just another name. This was the name of someone who never appeared, someone who played chess with living people. That operation had been authorized 3 days before Jessica's death, despite alerts that there would be civilians in the area, despite recommendations to postpone. But Tavares was in a hurry. He wanted results, wanted headlines, and sacrificed what he needed to for that. Carlos took the notebook, opened to the last page, and calmly wrote, "Yes." Tavares, the man who ordered killing without pulling the trigger. This time, he knew it wouldn't be simple. This target didn't walk in flip-flops. He rode in an armored car. He didn't sleep in a shack. He slept with guards at the door. But Carlos had changed too. He was no longer just the quiet-eyed moto-taxi driver. He was the reflection of everything the system thought it could control. He began to track the secretary's routine. 2 days watching the building, 3 days analyzing the security detail, listening to conversations, mapping escape routes, and he discovered a breach. Every Wednesday, at 7 a.m., Tavares went jogging at the park with 2 guards behind, but distracted, never imagining the favela had sent someone after him. Carlos didn't want blood on the street, he wanted eye contact. The following Wednesday, he was there. Helmet under his arm, notebook in his pocket. He stood at a strategic spot. When the secretary passed, Carlos stepped forward slowly. "Mr. Tavares." The man turned, slightly impatient. "Yes?" "Carlos, Complexo do Alemão. Remember the operation on July 14th? Sorry, I don't deal with those matters personally. Jessica died that day. My sister." The secretary turned pale. The guards closed in. "You want to threaten me here?" Carlos pulled out the notebook, showed the signatures. "You didn't pull the trigger, but you ordered it. And for that, you'll be remembered." He put the notebook away, turned his back, and disappeared. That same day, a billboard at the entrance of the community appeared painted. "Justice cannot be bought. The snake does not stay silent. Signed, CP." There was no gunfire, no blood, but the message hurt more than any wound, because now the people knew who commanded, and knew someone was demanding accountability. Justice, when aimed wrong, becomes tragedy. Carlos always had a code. He would never harm an innocent, never make someone pay for what they hadn't done. But that day, the world slipped. Evening began, the sky heavy. He was after a man linked to the security scheme of the operation that killed his sister, a middleman, a minor name, but one who helped fabricate reports and forge the maps that claimed no civilians were present. The target was marked. Marcelo, an employee of the tactical unit, known for walking around the hill as if he were just visiting. Carlos knew where he would be, at an informal meeting at one of the entrances to the grota. He had already followed him twice. On the third time, he decided to act. The idea was simple: to scare, to show that he was watching, without blood, without exposure. But what Carlos didn't know was that nearby, playing soccer barefoot, was Idolo, a 9-year-old boy who lived in the village in front. At the moment, Carlos approached, and the security's radio shouted an alert. "There's commotion!" People running into the alleys, pushing, shoving. Someone drew a gun. Another shouted. Carlos reacted on instinct, fired to disperse. One of the shots hit the ground, ricocheted, and struck Italo in the leg. It wasn't fatal, but it was enough to shatter Carlos's world, because when he came back to his senses, he saw the boy's mother crying, holding him in her arms, bleeding. He saw the child's eyes between pain and fear, and that hurt more than any wound he had ever had. Carlos fled the alley, disappeared for days, locked himself in one of the hideouts, without eating, without speaking to anyone. "What have I become?" he whispered to his own echo. For 3 days, no one heard from him. People began to think he had fallen. The radios went silent. Even the enemies thought the Black Snake had finished his mission. But on the night of the 4th day, a motorcycle stopped in front of the boy's house. Carlos left a letter there, a sum of money, and a request. "Forgive me, it wasn't supposed to be you. I promise that from now on no one else will fall by mistake." He didn't sign it. But the boy's mother knew. The letter went viral in the community, not because of the money, but because of the final phrase, "He who aims at the monster runs the risk of becoming one." Carlos returned to the streets, quieter, more restrained, but with a different look. He understood that even justice needs breaks, that vengeance without criteria only feeds the cycle. From then on, his mission changed. The next targets would not be those who executed, but those who ordered the executions. He didn't want to just punish anymore, he wanted to prevent. The snake was not meant to be seen, it was meant to be felt, like the cold before the storm, like the silence before the shot. But that day, the invisible gained a face. It all started with an old camera hanging from a pole in front of an abandoned bakery. The kind nobody pays attention to, the kind that, when working, nobody believes. But it worked, and it captured exactly what it shouldn't have. Carlos didn't notice. The mission was simple: confront a former militiaman who now worked as a private security guard for a councilman suspected of authorizing operations in exchange for electoral support. Carlos followed the man for 3 days. On the 4th night, he was alone, walking down a side street of the hill. Carlos cornered him between 2 walls, with no witnesses, or at least so he thought. It wasn't an execution, it was intimidation. Carlos spoke firmly, showed documents, threw on the ground a copy of the report linking him to deaths in suspicious operations. "If you keep serving these guys, you're an accomplice, and accomplices pay too." The man trembled, didn't react. Carlos turned his back and vanished, but the pole across the street had seen everything. 2 days later, the video was circulating in WhatsApp groups. Black and white image, grainy but sharp enough, helmet in hand, upright posture, the voice muffled but recognizable to those who knew. Someone edited it, added a soundtrack, signed it with a "those who do, pay." The favela went wild. "It's him, it's the Cobra. Now they're going to catch him." The police showed up in force. House searches, pressure on motorcycle taxis, crooked questions in the alleys, but no one said anything. Not to confirm, not to deny. The traffickers also grew restless. The name that was once a whisper was now a headline. Carlos watched the video sitting in one of the hideouts, shirtless, sweating cold. He knew that from that moment, everything changed. He could no longer walk without a helmet. He could no longer carry the notebook in his outside pocket. The legend had become the man, and the man was now hunted from all sides. But one thing the video didn't show: the reason, the pain, Jessica's death, the emptiness of having no answer. The video showed only a fragment, and that was the most dangerous part, because now, to those who didn't know the story, he was just another one out of line. That night, Carlos burned the notebook, memorized what was left, only one name, just one. But now every step had to be precise, because whoever messes with the system has to know when to vanish. In Alamo, when the hill goes silent, it's because something very big is about to happen. Silence was never peace. It's warning, it's message, it's fear. After the video, the entire complex held its breath. The police climbed with more force. The traffickers retreated, not out of respect but strategy. And in the midst of it all, Carlos, the Black Snake, vanished. This time, for real. No one saw the motorcycle. No one crossed paths with him at the bar. Not even the children who once drew the snake on the walls could say where he had gone. And that made fear change sides, because now danger had no face, it was memory. The secretary disappeared from the headlines. The councilman avoided appearances. The militiaman was seen boarding a plane out of the state. The name Black Snake was no longer spoken aloud. It became code. It became myth. But Carlos felt the weight in a hideout at the top of the hill. He lived on scraps of food and a battery-powered radio. He listened to everything, saw the reactions, and felt that, even without wanting to, he had become part of something bigger. But he also understood that it all could end in a second. All it would take was one mistake, one new camera, one traitor. And then the signal came. On a hot, moonless night, an old friend, one of the few who still spoke to him, appeared. Who's coming? Both sides. The order is to take him alive or dead. Carlos took a deep breath. He knew this moment would come. They're afraid. They are, but not of you. They're afraid of what you represent. The friend left him a package of food, a change of clothes, and a cell phone without a chip. If you want to leave, it's now, Carlos thought. To run and leave everything as it was, leave the last name without an answer. That very same night, a motorcycle was seen going down the side of the hill that no one else used. An old path, without lights, only known by those who knew every stone, every hole. And on the wall of the UPA the next day, a new graffiti appeared. You silenced the voice of the favela, but you forgot that the echo is louder in the hill. Signature, a lone snake but whole. The operation failed. They found nothing, no trace, no body, no bike. The hill, once again, went silent. But this time it wasn't fear, it was protection. Because even without knowing where he was, everyone knew why he existed. In the hood, there are stories that end without applause, without justice, without complete revenge, only with the weight of having lived through it all and still breathing. Carlos didn't want to be remembered, but in the end, he became a scar on the skin of the favela. After his name leaked, after the walls were painted, after both sides came thirsty for blood, he disappeared, and no one knew where he was. Some said he had fled north, back to Belém. Others said he had died in silence and buried his name with him. But those who knew his trail knew that Cobra Preta never disappeared for nothing. He was waiting for the right time, the last delivery. The last name on the list was no longer just a name. It was an entire system. The one who authorized, who turned a blind eye, who wiped fingerprints after tragedy. And that someone now had a face. Mauricio Costa, State Intelligence Director. A man shielded, full of contacts, absent from the streets, but present in every operation that went wrong. Carlos observed for weeks. No motorcycle, no radio, only on foot. Disguised as a gas delivery man, car washer, recycler, until he saw the breach, a public security event at a luxury hotel in Copacabana. Mauricio would be there, with few guards, with the press, with a prepared speech. Carlos didn't want blood. He wanted him to see what no one else saw. On the night before the event, he left a box at the hotel's reception, without sender. Inside, a photo of Jessica, her death certificate, and a note. She died because of you, but you still sleep well. The next morning, before the event began, security was reinforced, but Carlos didn't want to enter. He just wanted to see Mauricio's face when he read it. And he did. The man froze in the lobby, looked around, grabbed the radio, and left, escorted. Carlos slipped out through a side alley, smiling for the first time in a long while. The following week, Mauricio Costa requested resignation, citing personal reasons. He vanished from the media. In the favela, the name Cobra Preta became official legend, graffitied, sung in reverse, whispered in bar circles. But Carlos was now just another face in the crowd, back to riding a motorcycle, No plate, no rush. Sometimes he carried groceries for an old lady, other times he helped haul a gas cylinder. Nobody asked, nobody spoke, but they knew. At the entrance of Alemão, on a crumbling wall, a phrase remained. Sometimes, to bring justice, you have to become what justice fears. No signature. Only the drawing of the coiled snake, quiet, but ready to bite if needed. The favela forgets quickly, but never completely. Some say Cobra Preta became a truck driver, roaming Brazil as if he had no past. Others swear he lives in a simple house near the edge of the hill, only coming out when things get tight. But everyone remembers Jessica, the young woman who dreamed of becoming a nurse, who smiled like she believed the world could change. She never came back, but she left her trace. And her trace became a mission engraved in her brother's skin. Today, when someone is buried without explanation, when an operation leaves bodies and no one is held accountable, when pain climbs the alley and justice runs out of breath, there's always someone who says, if Cobra were around, this wouldn't stay like this. And then silence returns, not from fear, but from remembrance. Because justice around there was never a courtroom, it was a motorcycle at the curve, a note at the door, eye to eye. And even without knowing where he is, many still sleep with this certainty. If one day the wrong name is crossed out, the snake returns.